Na.
Okay.
Na. Na.
That was me talking with music professor Kaylin Marcel Manson, and Andrew had the lovely idea of me trying a little musical exercise, singing exercise during that episode. I did not want to do it, but I did it for the listeners. So,
Hi, everyone. I'm Andrew Hart. I am the co-producer of this podcast alongside Melissa, and it is terribly frightening to be on this side of the mic. We do a lot of sort of in-depth stories about interesting things happening with faculty, with alumni, and it's hard to find moments where we can just be goofy and laugh, and that was a great one. Melissa and I decided it would be fun to have the last episode of this year be about revisiting some of our favorite moments from this year's episodes. Melissa, give me your first favorite moment from this season.
I really enjoyed our episode earlier this fall with English professor Justin Shaw. We spoke about Shakespeare. I have always loved English class. I love reading, and I enjoy Shakespeare so much that at one point I had a goldfish named Shakespeare. But Justin really approaches this topic differently than many other English scholars. He teaches Shakespeare in a way that allows people who don't enjoy this kind of writing to still participate with it and learn from it. One of the things that he does in his class is show students how people in Shakespeare's time were wrestling with the same kinds of issues that people still struggle with today. Topics like race, gender, and class. Here is a clip of Justin talking about how he approaches Shakespeare in his classroom.
I don't teach Shakespeare as like an appreciation class because I know what it means to not appreciate Shakespeare. I love to teach ideas. I love to teach how we can use Shakespeare as a starting point to think through ideas about relationships in the world and family and power in the world, for example. My own research is about race, and I think about the ways that racial language and racist behavior cultivates in the plays of Shakespeare themselves and in Shakespeare's world that show up in the plays. And then how we can learn from that, how the examples we see in the plays mimic and anticipate
Andrew,
some of the things we see in our own world.
I had a hard time connecting with it. I don't think I had a teacher like Justin who would sort of push past the language or the language barrier, getting used to that way of speaking and that way of listening to people speak. But I loved this episode, and I loved listening to how Justin sort of pushes Shakespeare into all kinds of places, especially places that are, more easier to relate to. My first choice for favorite moments of this season comes from an episode we did with Professor Shelly Tenenbaum. She is a professor here of sociology, and she works closely with something called the Emerson Prison Initiative. She has taught at a number of prisons in Massachusetts over the years. She came on the podcast and brought with her two former students, Mac Hudson and David Baxter. And the conversation was just awesome. It was hard to edit because there was so much there that we wanted to include. And this moment that I chose is just Shelley talking about what inspires her to go into prisons and to do good works.
There is something about people being invisible and being locked up behind walls and behind barbed wire that really terrifies me. Something that both my parents talked a great deal about was that horrible feeling that no one cared. That here they are suffering, here they are being locked up and no one is looking, and really that no one cares has always stayed with me. And I guess I just wanted to see. I wanted to see, what is going on behind those walls.
Conversations about prison are almost always really negative for reasons that are obvious. So it was refreshing to hear from folks who got something positive from their time in that atmosphere.
Next up, what you got for another moment from the season?
A super deep and philosophical conversation we had this summer was about the Barbie film. It was the topic of conversation everywhere, and we really wanted to dig into this existential crisis that we watched Barbie experience on film. Philosophy professor Wiebke Deimling joined us, and we broke down why Barbie was thinking about death so much. That was one of the big clips in the trailers leading up to the film, and we just kind of talked about how it is human nature to have those thoughts and to really get deep inside your mind about the meaning of life or what is happiness. And I think Barbie was a really fun way to think about these heavy topics.
Do you guys ever think about dying?
Barbie itself, the film, was such a fun way to also have conversations about meaning and death and existentialism and feminism. Our conversation with Wiebke was great. She was excellent. It was fun. She had fun with us. And whenever you get a chance to ask a philosophy professor to please go see the Barbie movie so that we can talk to her about it, it's a great opportunity.
So we were psyched.
All right, so my next choice for favorite moments from the season comes from an episode that we did with Associate Provost and Dean of the College and English Professor Betsy Wong. Betsy is someone who loves science fiction. Betsy talked to us about her connection to the book The Hobbit and how she read it at a really important time in her life when she had just immigrated to the United States as a young kid. So here's that clip.
The Hobbit was this little hobbit that went on an adventure and went to different lands and met different types of people. And it felt very close to me as a young person who immigrated to the US from Taiwan when I was 10 years old. To me, it feels like science fiction is just about immigration and about migrations and about
I am
resettlements.
an avid
about
reader,
the
but I am
experiences of
not
people
a
who
science
are
fiction
forced to
girly.
move, who have to
So
move,
Betsy really
voluntarily
schooled
move,
us
find
during this
themselves
episode.
in a
It was really
different
fun to
social and
watch
cultural
the tables
context,
flip from us as
and
interviewers
having
to
figure
Betsy
out
in
how to
full
coexist
teacher and
with
professor
people who are
mode.
very, very
And
different from you.
I learned a lot about science fiction. I don't know if I'm gonna pick up those books, but it was really fun to, hear about these topics.
Yeah, looking at The Hobbit through the lens of forced migration was something I had never, ever thought about, and it was eye-opening. It was fantastic. It was fascinating.
We talked to English professor Elizabeth Blake about the connection between food studies, queer studies, and modernist literature. And like I just said, I am an avid reader, but I had never considered reading books and relating depictions of food to depictions of queerness. And it was so interesting to listen to Elizabeth talk about this and to see all these connections that really felt obvious. And now I'm looking at books from this lens. So how do those topics connect? How we think about food can really relate to how we think about sexuality or gender. We're taught that certain foods are good or bad. That can relate to how sexual orientation is depicted in these books, right? Like maybe they're suggesting that heteronormativity is the right way to be. Elizabeth brought up a work that really paints this picture well. She mentioned the short story Bliss by Catherine Mansfield. At a first glance when you're reading it, the characters appear heteronormative. If you dig a little bit deeper, you can see a queer storyline emerging. Here's Elizabeth describing a specific passage from that short story.
The story arguably about a love triangle in which a woman is having a dinner party and discovers that her husband is having an affair with one of her guests. But if we read the story carefully, it's also really clear that she's in love with the guest her husband is having an affair with. And this becomes clear partly in the way these two characters, Bertha and Pearl Fulton, interact about food. There's a long glance that they share over the beautiful red soup, which as readers we kind of immediately recognize as tomato soup, but Mansfield lets it feel like something more elevated.
That scene was fun to edit. My next favorite moment is from an episode we did with Rabbi Joshua Franklin. Josh is an alum from 06. He actually did a master's in 07 as well. He is a rabbi at the Jewish Center of the Hamptons in East Hampton, New York. Just as ChatGPT was becoming part of the sort of cultural conversation, Josh had ChatGPT write him a sermon that he then delivered to his congregation. And he did not tell his congregation that it was written by ChatGPT. And he wanted to see if they could tell. And then he wanted to take this opportunity to talk about not just AI and what AI could or might not be doing, or its effect on our culture and our society. He wanted to talk. He took it as an opportunity to talk about empathy and how no matter what kinds of artificial intelligences are out there and that we're using in our day-to-day lives, and as that becomes more and more commonplace, that in his mind, ChatGPT or artificial intelligence will never be able to mimic human empathy. Here's a clip where he talked to us about that a little bit more.
One of the amazing things about ChatGPT is that it can understand and even identify correctly human emotion, perhaps even better than human beings can. But what it lacks is the ability to feel those same human emotions, and that's empathy. Empathy is where we recognize what someone's going through and we connect with them through our own personal feelings and experience. And while ChatGPT can recognize those things, it can't feel it itself. And that lacks the human connection and the human bond that we might form with another individual.
Artificial intelligence is one of the biggest talking points of this year. And after we talked to Rabbi Franklin, we've spoken to just a lot of professors and students about AI. And I think what has encouraged me is I'm hearing a lot of people say, this is a tool we can learn to work with. We don't need to fear it outright. It's kind of like, the internet or New Year's Eve right before the year 2000. People got really afraid, but we learned how to adapt to these things. So I guess we will see what happens moving forward. Yeah. That's what I liked about it. And he was great to talk to. What's up next for you? So last up for clips that really impacted me this year is an episode we did with English Professor Dianne Berg early on in the year. We spoke about how mothers are depicted in true crime and in mass media. Dianne spoke a lot about judgments that people place on mothers who kill their children and how it differs from when a father is committing these crimes. Beyond conversations about violence, we spoke about motherhood more generally, and Dianne had a really intriguing point about how pregnancy becomes a public experience. Here she is.
Women's bodies are always objectified, and I think anyone who identifies as a woman will attest to that. But a pregnant body is really public property in a new and special kind of a way. The minute the baby is born, no one cares about you anymore culturally. It's all about the baby then.
I had never thought about how, in her words, pregnancy becomes sort of a public property, something where you constantly have people coming up, wanting to touch your belly, wanting to ask you about it, strangers. We all experience that. I have kids, and that happened when my partner was pregnant. It's super interesting to hear that articulated in such a way. The next moment I want to talk about comes from an episode we did with Professor Spencer Tricker. He's an English professor, and he teaches a course called Divided Loyalties, and he uses it to talk to students about coming-of-age stories. And me personally, I love coming-of-age stories in film, in books, in podcasts even. Just stories of people, usually at young people, teenagers, moving through something, understanding themselves differently or seeing the world differently. It's such a rich moment to discuss and to look at it through the lens of divided loyalties and what that might mean. I just loved listening to Spencer talk about it.
I would define divided loyalties as never a static problem. I think that when you talk about divided loyalties, you're always talking about an active process of forces warring within yourself, warring in the world outside. It's a kind of dynamic conflict between commitments. The nature of those commitments and how passionately one feels will change over time, but I would say it's that dynamic conflict that unfolds continuously.
I imagine this is a really powerful class for students because they're at this age where they're going through a big transformation, getting ready to enter the quote, real world, unquote. And I think this is a really good opportunity for these students to reflect on how they've grown and what they want to do next. Coming of age is also just one of those unifying experiences. We all had different teen years, but everyone can relate to that feeling of awkwardness or thinking that you don't belong.
That's right. We also sent our student reporter, Brenna Moore, out into the world to ask some students what their favorite coming-of-age books or films might be.
Speaking of student reporters, we have a lot of fun working with our interns on these episodes. You might remember hearing Ed Gregg last semester. He's now an MFA student making a video game here on campus. But we wanted to talk to him about the big PAX East convention. If you're into games, you know what this is. And we had a little bit of fun with this episode.
We did. I think, again, just like how we started the episode with Kaylin, it's always so much fun to find those moments where we can be silly and be goofy. And this is so much fun, turning it into like a game show style discussion of our favorite games was just a hoot.
Lightning round, are you ready?
I'm ready.
What was the best game you played at PAX?
The best game I played at PAX was Dome.
What's the best game you play right now? Pressure's on.
Oh my god. The best game. Well, the game I play most frequently is Overwatch because I really like competitive games. But that is definitely not the best game I play right now. The best game I play right now is I'm still playing Elden Ring because it took me forever to finish it last year.
What's the best character you've played in any game?
Oh man, I'm a big fighting game fan. I really like Shao Kahn in Mortal Kombat. That's my favorite character to play.
Thank you so much for hanging out with us while we take a look back.
This is a great time to shoot us an email. Let us know what you want to hear about next. If there's a certain professor that you want to see featured, we love getting your feedback and your pitches. So our emails are in the show notes. Please do feel free to drop us a line.
And same goes for alumni. If you have an idea, if you want to be on the podcast, if you have a friend, a colleague, somebody you looked up to, somebody you want to know, you want to hear from, please send us an email. Give us a shout.
And as always, please subscribe. To hear more episodes of Challenge Change, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or whatever platform you listen to.
Challenge Change is produced by me, Andrew Hart.
And me, Melissa Hanson.
For Clark University.
Bye.